Welcome to the A Minute to Midnight show. This is Tony. Today we see the return of Stan Deyo to our show, and I tell you, I recorded this earlier in the day and it's a great show. The last 30 minutes of the show particularly is so fascinating that it contains information that I think many people will not have ever heard before, and it's absolutely amazing. Welcome back, Stan.
Good to be here, up in Colorado where it's nice and warm and you're going into winter.
Yes, it's definitely getting a bit chilly and wet here at the moment. And
I wouldn't mind the wet. We're in the high desert, so when it rains or snows, we're tickle pink.
yeah, well, we had very little rain for quite a while, and it's just started to get wet. And yeah, the first bit of snow, not down at sea level where I am, but on the ranges the last couple of days as well. So, yep, winter's definitely on the way.
Well, it just left us. You're welcome to it. It's fine.
Yeah, well, we'll see what sort of a winter we get, I suppose. It certainly doesn't get as extreme here as what you get at either end of the scale, either heat or cold. It's pretty
Yeah,
mild, really. So, but you can still get cold and you can still get pretty hot. So here, even though it's not at the same extreme. Hey, at the end of the previous show, when you were on as our guest, you suggested that in your next appearance you would fill us in a bit more on your discoveries and thoughts about the lost continent of Atlantis. So I'd like to begin here. I think that's a good place to start. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about what you believe and what you've discovered about how it disappeared?
Well, first of all, yeah, I have found Atlantis, and the capital's island of it, Poseidon's Island, they call it, is much smaller than the actual Atlantis. Um, the Just to cut to the chase here very quickly, the island of Atlantis is now hooked onto a continent, so it's not obviously an island, but it's all of Saudi Arabia, all of Arabia, in fact, up to Iran and part of Iraq. There was water going where the Suez Canal is. It joined the Mediterranean, and that was the Red Sea joining. That was that leg of the water. And there was more water than there is now at the Gulf of Aden off of Yemen. And then the Persian Gulf connected to the Mediterranean up through the border between Turkey and Syria. Now, that made the whole thing an island. And I started looking at Plato's account. And Plato's account said that there are two ways to interpret it, but that the extent or the size of Atlantis was greater or equal to the size of ancient Libya and Asia Minor. So I mapped out on a computer what ancient Libya looked like. It was bigger than it is now, and Asia Minor, which is mainly Turkey. Now, together they had about 1.2 to 1.3 million square miles of area. So I said, well, okay, if Arabia is in between those two in extent, or equal to or greater, what is the area of the what would have been Atlantis, that was above water at the time? And it calculated out to 1.3 million square miles. So I think it solves the mystery of whether the Greek account was talking about the areas of them or the coastlines. Now, if you go on coastlines, you go back in those times, how would they measure the area of, say, Saudi Arabia? I mean, that would have taken some pretty heavy math for that period of time, or the area of Turkey or the area of Arabia. So I thought, well, okay, maybe I'm not so smart there. Maybe I should go on coastlines because they can measure coastlines with their ship going around in so many knots of rope and whatever. And that might be it. Now, in that case, what I think is Atlantis is slightly bigger, not much, in coastline area to what we would have seen in those days. So I don't know, which one to use, but going on what I did as far as the area, I did find many artifacts. As a digital armchair archaeologist, I flew over with Google Earth, and I found over 1,400 different formations of some of lava stone from Western Arabia, and then others of sandstone up toward Syria. in the Golan Heights, where the giants lived in those days. And that's a matter of biblical record as well.
Yeah, I'd like to get into that a little bit. Yep. Okay.
Well, those giants, they were crossbreds between off-worlders or aliens and human straight DNA from the Garden of Eden. Last, what was it, 2014, I discovered that the Garden of Eden was in Tanzania inside a crater called the Ngoro crater, the Ngoro crater. Now, mankind, in fact, 5 miles outside the edge of that crater is where the Leakeys found evidence of the oldest human skeletons on the planet. And so if you look at the migration path from there down toward the Danakil Plains heading toward Yemen, you'll see that the Omo Valley is where they also found the mitochondrial Eve lived for all the people on the earth. So we know that that was the area. And that branch of mankind was pure human DNA going down into Arabia, where they met with and crossbred with what the Greeks call little g gods or demigods. And that's where we see the giants were produced, and finding evidence of the giants even after Atlantis was destroyed in the Great Flood. We do find that there were some who survived. The tribe of Og and Rephaim and Zamzamim and Goliath's tribe, all those were evidence of that. Now, what caused the flood that sank, Saudi Arabia for a while, or most of it anyway, was a mystery. And scholars all over the world have been trying to find what superhuman, supernatural, what big event caused the planet to go into flood. Well, the evidence I found shows that Saudi Arabia, or Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, was mostly underwater for about a year. And there were other parts of the planet that were heavily underwater and had been washed by tidal waves. Now, tidal waves come from water moving at a high speed from some upset in the mantle of the earth, a big earthquake or a bomb or something. Now, I started looking, where is something in that area that would have caused this? And I discovered, in that search, I discovered a meteor impact crater of a meteor that made a crater about 200 miles in diameter, maybe 250, depending on how you measure, the diameter you want. Because there's ridges that form out from the impact zone. And according to NASA's formula for figuring the size of the asteroid, it says that the asteroid was about 12 miles in diameter. Now, my calculation showed that the asteroid that hit the Earth over in the Indian Ocean was about 22 times the amount of energy of the one that hit in the Gulf of Mexico and the Yucatan Peninsula, called the Chicxulub. And that one made a crater 100 miles in diameter. But this one, making one as it did, it was, many times bigger area, surface area.
Yeah.
Now, you can see the imprint of this. There's two places, because when it hit in the Indian Ocean so hard that it caused continents, the tops of continents, to move, not the pedestals underneath so much, although it did move some of those pedestals, which are called cratons. Now, if you look at a map, I'm just pulling up here one in Google Earth so that I can talk to you about it. If you look in Google Earth, right up above Darwin in Indonesia, on the lower right-hand side of Indonesia, you will see an odd kind of stretched circle in the seabed that formed part of the islands or moved them around considerably. And if you look at that rim there on the right side of it, that rim is the edge of the crater that was pushed up by this meteor, which hit not there, but over in India on the east coast in a place called the Cuddapah Basin, Cuddapah Basin. Now, at that time, it was a shallow impact, so it hit there, it went under Jakarta and started to surface again, almost skipping, out again over toward New Guinea. And I found by looking in NASA's records of the dents, if you wish, in the Earth, the high spots and low spots. They've been taking satellite networks or satellite constellations, they call them, to map the surface of the Earth. It has a mean surface like the slightly teardrop shape, very slightly teardrop shape of the Earth. And then there are dense and raised areas. And there are only about two of these raised areas. And then one huge depression. And that huge depression, surprise, surprise, is over in the Indian Ocean. There's another little depression off of California, Southern California, and off of the Florida coast, all part of some other meteor that probably formed the rise in the North Atlantic. Originally, I thought that the meteor impact that hit in India was vectored, toward the northwest of the planet, heading into the Atlantic. But no, this one here that I'm looking at, I had to change my direction on it. It went toward the New Guinea or the Southwest Pacific. There was another one, as I say, that caused the Atlantic bulge, and it might have been the Yucatan one. At the time, the Chicxulub meteor, the imprints do show that. And if you get into NASA and look at their geoid undulations map, you'll find the geode heights will show you that the Indian Ocean is depressed, and it's depressed in the form of a large meteor impact. When I say large, the area of the impact that was formed there is, I'm just running a calculation here, it is roughly, let's see, is that big enough there? It goes up there, it goes over there. Okay, it's roughly 3.5 million square miles with a diameter of 2,100 miles. That's the hole that it punched in the surface of the Earth. Now, that's a reasonable sized asteroid, don't you think?
Yes,
Now,
absolutely.
the just last week in Australia, a scientist there with the Australian National University published a paper he's been working on, and he's been doing some digs up in the northwest of Australia with some core samples down through some magma, volcanic flows that have hardened. And down underneath there, he found in the core samples spherules. These are little round glass beads that only form when a large meteor or asteroid impacts the Earth, and it forms these molten glass things that spray a long way down the path from where the asteroid hit. And he says he can't. There's spherules are all over there. They're even out on the seashore and down into the seabed off of the Marble Bar region. And so he said, don't know where the meteor was that made this, but it was pretty big, and he estimated the size of it, and the size he estimated is so close to what I found that it's amazing.
Wow.
And so I wrote him an email. I said, "Hey, look, doctor," I said, consider this. Here's an impact crater that's still part of it is on the eastern side of the continent or the country of India, and the rest of it is spread across over toward New Guinea. And that would have been the missing huge meteor that you were searching for. Oh, he says, well, no, look, good idea, but if you look at the age of the sediments, the way we date things, they're in two different time periods, two different epochs that couldn't possibly be the same event. But what he wasn't considering was a great weight of evidence that's showing that the way we date geology is way up to shoot, because the geological layers across the planet are not uniform. There'll be some layers that appear, say, in the Grand Canyon, but they don't appear in Australia or New Zealand. They have a different strata. So sadly, he's now refused to find his meteor that he was looking for, his asteroid.
Well, because it messes with the whole thing with evolution and all that if you start going down that road, doesn't it? And they don't,
It
the
does.
Darwinist theory, that starts challenging all of that then.
Yeah, I've got a fellow here. I'll just tell your listeners, a guy named Jay Hall. He's got a master in science, and he's over in Texas. And he contacted me after a show I did a few weeks back. Said, "Look, you got to read my book, and it's called the Young Earth Science Book, the Young Earth Science YesBook.com. You can find it on Amazon and download an ebook if you want. It's a very learned, like a doctoral thesis on the problems with Darwin, and gradualism and all that.
Yeah.
And I'm only 3/4 way through the book, and my jaw's hitting the floor with all the stuff he's found that proves that we have a young Earth, a young universe. I just get the book, J. Hall, Young Earth Science, and on Amazon. I don't get any dollars for that, but I certainly think that this man, he's a Christian fella and
Yeah.
should be supported. The
Yeah,
work is
sounds good.
exemplary, exemplary. But now, when when I found this impact crater, part of it in India and the other part of it, where it surfaced heading toward New Zealand, toward New Guinea, it also meant that Australia and New Zealand didn't live where they are now. And I found the missing place for them over in the southern part of the Indian Ocean. Um, southern to middle part, actually. West Australia goes up to a line that comes down from just offshore of Jakarta down toward the South Pole. But it enabled us to solve the footprint that was left in the ocean bottom when New Guinea and Indonesia and Australia and New Zealand and a bunch of little islands were all shoved out of where they used to live over there, much closer to India. It just all the pieces just fit. I've been going deep down into the mud maps of the ocean, the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, and following very subtle little grooves in the mud of the sea to see where India used to connect to the little crack that joins the continents together. And what I'm finding is, to my surprise, that India did not stretch as far as I thought it had. It stretched down a ways, but it didn't reach that crack line between Africa and India and the other islands and continents because that occurred when, in the time of Peleg, the Earth started to split and the surface started to spread. And that, I think, was also due within, because it was within 100 years of the impact of this meteor, that it caused the Earth to tilt 23.5 degrees. You can see in the line that this thing makes from India over to New Guinea, you can see why it tilted the Earth to 23.5 degrees. In those days, before the impact, Iceland used to be the North Pole. And now then, of course, it's where it is now. But all these things just support the Bible so well that I'm just, I've gotten over the hair standing straight out in the back of my neck, but, I'm still get hoarse from yelling, Eureka, I found it.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to just see the thing that caused water to just surge around the planet in great tsunamis, boil up into steam into the upper atmosphere where it's really cold and it condensed into rain for 40 days and nights, break open the fountains underneath the cratons of the continents over in the Indian Ocean, causing swelling of hot, warm water from the Moho discontinuity shell of salt water to flow up into the surface and start flooding even after the tsunamis. So although there may have been pockets, and I stress small pockets, there were some in Egypt, there were some in South America, there obviously were some in the Golan Heights or somewhere maybe in Mount Hermon, where the hybrids survived. But that's why when God sent Israel to reclaim the promised land and Joshua was leading them, that's why he was told to kill every man, woman, child, every living thing in certain villages, because they were part of the corrupt DNA where the aliens or the fallen angels had crossbred with humans and with animals as well. They had screwed up the animal chain as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's there. It's just really there. He was cleaning up the mess.
Yeah. Thing is, a lot of people, don't really understand the whole Nephilim thing and where they came from. But
Right.
I think it's quite clear, really, that that's what happened. Some of our listeners will not be aware of your background and knowledge on propulsion systems and UFOs and secret black ops operations connected with so-called aliens and UFOs, which, I believe are the Nephilim. Can you fill us in a little bit on your thoughts and background and time working in this area in the past?
Yeah. You're talking about a project that I was asked to join in Dallas when I worked there as a computer systems analyst and programmer. And I was approached by a fellow that I only briefly had met in this corporation I worked for over coffee down in the canteen. And he turned out to be a guy that he was Polish. He came here after the war, so he had a heavy accent. smoked his cigarettes funny, stuck between the second and third finger. Anyway, Ted, he was having coffee with me. He says, "What are you doing here?" And I told him. I said, he said, "What do you do for fun?" And I said, "Well, at home, in my lab, I've been working on a way to beat gravity and to make a disc shape flying craft." And he kind of didn't raise an eyebrow. He said, "Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting." And I said, "And I've been working on another idea to make an antenna system like Dr. Morey did and draw electricity out of the atmosphere, basically out of solar wind." "Oh, well, that's interesting," he said. And so that was it. And we left. And about a month later, I came back down. There was no one in the canteen except me. And then this guy shows up again, comes and sits right in front of me. And he says, "Hey, what we're talking about the other day?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I did tell you that you probably ought to see a friend of mine. He'd be interested in that." And you apparently didn't ring him. I said, "No, I'm really not going to be talking to any, professors or anybody like that because I don't have a degree and they probably wouldn't listen to me. So this guy will. And I want you to go see him this afternoon." So I did. And went over to see this Dr. James R. Maxfield there in Dallas. And he has a radiation research clinic, which had actually, they had treated, I think it was Werner von Braun for cancer. And he was involved in the space program,
Yeah,
Dr.
yeah.
Okay. And Dr. Maxfield, of course, worked with Dr. Edward Teller on the anti-gravity projects. Well, I didn't know that, so I go over to see him, and he takes me into his office. There's just him and me and his secretary in this big building, and he says, he takes me around the office there, small office, looking at the wall, the big photos of him and Teller going under the pole in the submarine. And he said, now sit down, boy, and tell me what you're doing there at home in your lab. And I said, "Well, I don't know that you'd be interested. I mean, I'm just an amateur doing all this kind of stuff. I've been kind of working, about gravity and magnetism and stuff and studying how to." He said, "Well, look, don't play games with me. You're working on anti-gravity." And I said, "Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I didn't know that you'd use that word." He said, "Well, we use the technical term electrogravitics, but that's the same thing." He said, "You're building or researching a device." He says, "We've already built several versions of it since the late 50s, and we'd like for you to join our project down in Australia under Dr. Teller." And that was the beginning of a long sojourn of 30 years in Australia. Not all of that was with the team. In fact, only about 2 or 3 years was I connected with the program because they had a war or something with our underground bases where these non-humans, these fallen ones, and their kind of biological robots, these little gray critters, where they had a war and kicked us out of all the bases we built for them. Now, apparently, the humans after World War II had ended, the Allies got together. In fact, even the Russians were invited in. That we were kind of at odds with them a bit on the surface. And it was decided that we had to figure out a way to stop war entirely because the next one would destroy all life, regardless of who won, nuclear war. And they had reasoned in the meetings they had that you couldn't force people into a dictatorship like Hitler tried because the resistance that France and other groups had put up proved that it would just break from within. There would be resistance. And that the League of Nations, which had already failed, and United Nations, a fledgling thing, you couldn't get 2 or 3 nations, much less 170 or 80 of them, to agree on what cup of tea to have that day, much less anything serious. They just couldn't get it. So by negotiated discussions, by tyranny of dictatorship, you couldn't do it. They said there had to be a third alternative, and that was to fool the people of Earth into accepting a new world order long enough that they would see the benefits of having a planet run by a global government with global economy and nice guys at the helm. Of course, they didn't exactly have an answer as to how they would choose and maintain the integrity of the leader. That is still something they're dealing with, I'm sure. But anyway, that was it, and they were going to make false technology and flying saucers or space people, whatever they could, to fool the people of Earth into thinking that some non-political, non-religious group had come to Earth and was here to share technology and help us.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, the quote unquote alien presence, the Greys and the Nordics with reddish hair and freckled skin and stuff, they made themselves known to our guys here in the New England states of the United States, and several places actually at Holloman Air Force Base, and they signed an agreement with humans present from most of the major nations to exchange technology, anti-gravity, and various other things in return for letting them, helping them and letting them build underground research facilities under ocean and under land, that we would supply the manufacturing complexes and technology to help them do. And also, if they could do some genetic monitoring of animal life forms and the odd human being. And that agreement fell through the floor almost the moment it was signed, and they started cheating. But anyway, in the late 70s, mid to late 70s, our bases were taken over by these fallen ones, these aliens,
Yeah.
and they kicked the humans out. And it wasn't a pleasant parting. There were a lot of people killed on our side and their side, and my records and data and stuff were taken out of the office there in Melbourne, in Australia. My control agent was Sir John Williams, Captain Sir John Williams, and they tried to hide myself and several other guys in the program from who might be getting a hold of the files from the fallen ones to kill us, I suppose. I don't know, but that's how I finished up in the program on the run. And I changed my name to a pseudonym and went underground as a kind of a hippie for probably a year or two. But
What year would this have been?
I was on the run from 1974 till 1976, I think it was. Yeah, I crossed the Nullarbor, in the days when it wasn't paved and that kind of stuff, and
Yeah.
towing gasoline and food with us. And I found a group of two men and a woman and a woman that was they were hippies. They had painted combi vans and stuff like that, and so I grew hair long and wore a bandana and sunglasses, and became invisible. And even when we get to a city like in Adelaide or Perth, if you dress that way, people would look at you like you were a homeless person or something and look away. So it's a good way to hide. But I'm skipping parts of the story, but I was pursued, and I had the FBI pursuing me there. I had worked for them once before, but they aren't licensed to go overseas, or they weren't at the time. And they were looking for me, and the Russians were looking for me, and I was also being pursued by a Jesuit priest, one of the kind that's kind of an enforcer, a tough guy.
Oh, yeah.
He caught me. He caught me one night out by a campfire in the middle of the Nullarbor, and I had those two or three other people with me there by the campfire, and he sidled up to me, and in the course of the evening, shared some coffee and stuff with us, and he just kind of said in a low voice to me, he says, "I was sent to find you and take you out, but I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to forget that I found you." And so he
Did he
let me
give you a
go.
reason? Did he give you a reason why he changed his mind?
Nope, and I wasn't arguing. Let
Yeah.
us say he was not a mamby-pamby fella. He's
Yeah.
one of the kind of guys you look at and you think, he probably eats nails for breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
no, I was pleased to keep breathing. And I did run into him once or twice over in Perth when I settled there eventually and started using my real name. But he was active in political and secret society things going on over there, the Knights of the Southern Cross and things like that. Anyway, now when we were kicked out of their bases, I think what had happened was that these are fallen ones that are in the direction of Satan, and they've been cast out of where they dwell. And probably the best way I can describe it is a parallel universe or a dimension to us, where they live is just as real as us, and they're right next to us, but separated by like a phase wave, so that they can probably see us, but we can't see through the veil to them. Again, what Scripture says. Now, when they were cast out with basically what they could carry, I think, saucers, technology, whatever, but they needed a place to manufacture weapons to make the last war with the Messiah, Yeshua. And they got us to agree to build them these underground research facilities in return for technology, blah, blah, blah. And what they really wanted was to get the infrastructure up to a stage that they could manufacture everything needed in warfare from that point forward. And once we were no longer needed, that's when they kicked us out. And that's why they kicked us out. And we're going to see the official arrival of quote unquote aliens from other worlds. It'll be a satanic deception,
Yeah.
the great deception spoken of. I'm certain of that.
Yeah.
And people will be at the point of nuclear war, will have lost faith in all their leaders. I mean, look at the Americans, look at the Germans. Everybody's lost faith in their leadership.
Yeah.
And we're at the brink of a nuclear war. We've got famines starting. We've got fires. We've got nature out of control.
Yeah.
And boy, anybody could come up with an answer that wasn't, a religious or political answer. It was just an off-world answer that worked, would be acceptable. And that's why people are going to accept the New World Order under a leader who will have the support of Satan and his technology. Now, understand, Satan realizes that people read the Bible and are expecting this great deception. So his man and him are going to overthrow some quote unquote bad alien critters that came posing as, messengers of light and whatever, and are going to destroy the Illuminati. People are going to cheer over that and think, these were the bad guys, and obviously anybody who destroyed the Illuminati be good guys.
Yeah.
I tell this so that the Illuminists who think that they're scot-free can quake in their boots, because the devil's coming for them real quick.
Yeah.
They're traitors, and what you do when you take over a country, or a world in this case, you get all the traitors of that tribe and you kill them because you can't trust them.
Yeah.
And people will also probably be told, okay, we're getting rid of the little gray critters. They've been abducting you and harming you and doing terrible things to your horses and your cattle. And so we'll get rid of them. They're from another part of the universe, and they shouldn't be here. And people will cheer. Hey, the good guys are here, and they even look like us. They're handsome. They're slightly taller, but hey, great stuff. And it'll be just like the TV series and the movie V, where they came looking like humans and being friendly and everything, but they had lizard DNA in them,
Well, it's interesting because when it comes to looking for the Antichrist, most people are looking for a man to come and fill that role at some point.
Well, he will.
Well,
It'll be a man, but he'll be under the direction of Satan.
Yeah,
And
well,
remember,
the thing is, because I haven't heard too many people look at it from this angle, but, if we look at a couple of scriptures, like Daniel chapter 2, it's talking about, the final kingdom or empire. And verse 43 says, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." So that to me shows something mixes with the seed of men, perhaps fallen angels and return of the Nephilim. Then when you look at Revelation chapter 13, we see the rising of the Antichrist and the false prophet, and both of them are called beasts. So why are they called beasts if they are simply men? Could it be that they are not actually fully human, but maybe some sort of
it
hybrid?
could be. It could be. It certainly could be. When I started the program today, I was talking about finding Atlantis was Arabia. What I can tell you now and add to that is that one of our most secret bases with the aliens was in the middle of Saudi Arabia, in a place called Riyadh, and it's about 120 miles outside of Riyadh, in the Jabal Tuwaiq mountain range. And that base you couldn't get into unless you were flown in by one of our craft, and even then the craft had to undergo close scrutiny to be sure it wasn't occupied by somebody that didn't belong there. And that was an assembly area for some of the craft that we did use. But now, Saudi Arabia, there in Riyadh, that was a governorship given to a young prince by the name of Mohammed bin Salman. And Salman is the Arab form of Solomon. And in Revelation 13, that you mentioned, it does say that here is wisdom. And the number of the man, the number of the beast, the number of a man, 666. All right. In the Bible, 666 relates to, as far as a leader, King Solomon, who earned 666 talents of gold a year.
Yeah.
Now, the modern Antichrist will be a Solomon type. The modern Antichrist will allow the Jews to rebuild Solomon's temple, the small temple, up on the Temple Mount. Now, Mohammed bin Salman is second in line to the throne of Saudi Arabia at the moment, but his father, King Salman, who is supposed to give the kingship to his nephew, Mohammed bin Nayef, an older man, has given a lot of the powerful portfolios already to his son, who is only second in line.
Mm.
And he's 31 now, and he's proving to be a rather wild, risk-taking, military, alliance-forming, reforming the Arabian economy type guy. He's a young guy trying to make his mark and stumbling along, but still getting things done. And he has formed an Arab Union of 39 countries.
Yeah.
And he's not even a king yet.
Yeah.
Now, he's a prince, and he may make a treaty with Israel and many other nations after they try to destroy Israel in a military affront. Now, the United States has been meeting with young Prince Salman right now, this last week, to agree to sell them weapons, heavy-duty weapons, for defense against ISIS, allegedly. But if he has these 39 nations in his pocket, they can go against Israel. They're sitting right there on the edge of it and could try to destroy Israel. Of course, Israel will surprise them greatly with the nuclear facilities that will just burn them to the ground. And young bin Salman will probably be injured in that, or just shortly thereafter, by his own party or his own family. But he will retreat, probably down to Riyadh, and the northern half of Arabia will go to Israel, as will other parts of the invading countries. And Israel will expand its borders back out to basically what was promised to Abraham. And that's all around this young Prince Solomon. I mean, he may not be the Antichrist, but let's say that he's got fingers in an economic bank, the Saudi International Exchange Bank in Jeddah, and they're looking at cashless systems for the whole world and for Saudi Arabia to get around all the criminal activities. So he's got his finger in it, but so does Israel. Israel's been playing with numbering systems in cashless cities called smart cities. So in that part of the world, they are really advanced in the thing that we're told will be a sign of that Antichrist government.
See, another thing that, like Jesus talks in Matthew 24, that it'll be like in the days of Noah. So what categorized the days of Noah? It was the genetic impurity, I believe. Like you know,
and worshiping all kinds of weird gods and strange practices.
Yeah. So where are these alien beings? These Nephilim? Like, are these alien greys? They're just a suit, really, aren't they? In a sense, a flesh suit for some other being that doesn't belong.
Well, I think they're probably like robots, but biological robots instead of steel and mechanics. They're biological, and you know they don't appear to have a soul or empathy or stuff. A lot of the reports of people that have been abducted by them say that they don't care if you hurt or in pain or cry or anything else. They're very emotionless.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that they've been data gathering and genetic mining to allow Satan to crossbreed with not only animals but with people to make a vehicle for perhaps disembodied spirits he plans to bring back in.
So you don't think the Antichrist himself could be such a being?
Oh, I didn't say that.
Okay.
I mean, which one of King Solomon's wives gave birth to Prince Solomon, and was it his child? You know, and young Prince Solomon started his political and economic reign, even though he's number 2. He started it last year when he turned 30, just like Jesus did, 30, 31, 32, 33. So a lot of the Antichrist duplications of what Christ did are being done by this young fellow right now. And he's changing their religious practices. And, you know, it's just, he may not be the guy, okay? But coming from old Atlantis where all the crossbreeding was done, and, you know, it just smacks of that's got to be what's happening.
It's definitely someone to be watching anyway, that's for sure. Yeah. Very interesting. So the spacecrafts, you know, the sources, and well, they seem to be getting more complex. You know, once upon a time it was just flying saucers. Now you got these TR3B or whatever they are, you know, shaped things. How do you think they're actually playing into all of this?
Well, I understand that once we lost control of the the technology and the bases that we were sharing with the satanic ones. We were limited. I'm sure they only let us have, as mankind at large, access to certain technologies we've developed and that they've given us. Beyond that, they stop us. They probably destroy any base or any new technology that they don't think we should have that would, impair their proposed rule of the planet. And so, is the TR-3B, is that one of ours? It might be. But then again, there are things that are large flying platforms that are, a mile in diameter and things like that, that went over Phoenix. So these things are really large craft that are utilizing the same principles of anti-gravity, which is a folded electronic field. It's two pulsed direct current magnetic coils that are set in opposition to each other and two of the axes like XY, XY, and it produces an altitude for that craft. When you set the field, it'll set at a certain distance from the gravitational field it's operating in, and when you fly, that's why you get that floating leaf or fluttering leaf type effect when you see them fly over mountains, is because the mass concentrations over there vary from valley to peak. And so since it's following a certain gravitational value, it will dip and rise as the gravity dips and rises across the planet, which it does. Our satellites have mapped it and shown us that. And that kind of a thing, whether the aliens do it or whether we do it, you can build a 30-foot diameter craft, which we had done, and that has anti-gravity. It directs a field in and around and through everything in the craft and the crew, and you're all, in essence, accelerated together, so there's no like G stresses when they do it. And if you wanted to make a craft a mile wide or a mile in diameter, you could take a bunch of these little 30-foot jobbies and punch them up into pods or into cavities underneath a framework, build a big framework that looks like a city if you want, and they're all powered simply by these little craft that are all linked together in a common field and run together. So
would it
that
be
gets
would it be humans or would it be the hybrids that are running these things?
Hybrids and possibly some humans that are still in league with them. I don't know for sure because I haven't been in the program for years, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust them. They're going to come saying, "Look, he's in the desert here or there. Go see him."
Yeah,
And
yeah. Oh, yeah. No, well, obviously, I wouldn't trust them either. But I'm thinking so many people would be fooled. I had L.A. Marzulli on the other day, and he said all it would take is 1 mile wide craft to sit there, and it'll be game over.
I know, and I know how we could build it. As I say, we could have built it with 30-foot diameter craft linked together in a matrix. But and you see, the argument our physicists and engineers have with a mile-wide craft is this: it is so wide, so long that any expanse of metal holding things together would bend and creak and fall under its own weight. And you certainly couldn't be transferring from point A to point B at high speed. That's just out of the question. But what they don't realize is you can distribute smaller regions of that craft into, like, as I said, like a bunch of little pods where you have nodes, and they're like spaceships or flying saucers, but they're plugged into it. And those are all linked together so that the most gravity or inertia that you would have would be in a 30-foot diameter of that little craft, because each part of the structure of the whole craft is linked into the field. And but if our engineers and scientists don't accept that, don't understand how that works, they will be awed by the magic of their technology they're watching.
So, how was it already fairly far advanced then when you were working in that program?
Yes. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. At that time, well, obviously they had the anti-gravity craft, which could perform miraculous feats of turning in high speed simply by changing what's called the energy density of the crew and the craft, and altering the rate of chemical and physical processes as you turn a corner. It means that as you turn a corner, you go into slow time and you can play a game of cards while you turn a corner. But to the people on the ground, you've just turned it in a blink of an eye and a flash, and you've gone off somewhere else. But we've had that, and there was another technology I was pretty impressed by. The security teams were given, human security teams were given kind of a fat-looking handgun. The end of it was a little, a little big, like a donut, and it had like a muslin cloth type front to it. Excuse me. And you could charge those up on 240 volts because this was over in Europe and Australia, and they were like the, science fiction stun guns. You could shoot a guy with that and electrically stun him. It's like a stun gun that shoots an invisible toroid to the target with high voltage charge. And that was interesting. You could just stick them in and charge them overnight and put them in your holster, and away you went with your Buck Rogers gun. The movie A Day the Earth Stood Still, the original one, you saw the flying saucer land, and you saw the solid saucer suddenly separate, and a door slid sideways, and a guy would come out, and a robot or whatever, and then the door would close, and it'd be solid metal again. Well, they had that technology that they let us have, and what you do inside of your metal craft is there's like parallel strips, and those strips are adhered to the surface of the metal inside um, to form a doorway, let's say. And in between those two strips, you can set up a phase difference in the molecular resonance of the metal. And in essence, you push a button and it cuts a hole. It separates the molecules. It doesn't waste any of them. They don't fall to the ground. It just separates the molecules of a doorway, the edge of a doorway. And you can have it hydraulic or spring loaded or whatever else, and it'll flop out, and you can walk out and impress the natives, come back in, have it repositioned to where it should be, and the phase is put into instead of dissonance, it's into harmony, and the molecules rebond, and you have a solid door. So to the peasants, outside that don't know about that magic, it looks like you magically cut a hole in your solid metal ship, walk through it, talk to them, do your business, go back, and magically close it back to a solid hull again.
Yeah,
There
so
was actually one done in New Zealand. Yeah, that's right. One of the guys was telling me they had a big ship that they were building somewhere. I think it was in New Zealand. Yeah, and they had miscalculated, or on the blueprints they'd miswritten the size, the length of a huge armature, a shaft that was being driven to drive the props for this big vessel. And the expense of it and the timing was such that they needed to take the shaft they had and shave off a few inches of it in situ. And they called one of our teams in to do it, and took all the staff and workers of the factory out and let them have a lunch break for about an hour or two. They were told, don't touch any of the metal of the building, stay clear of the building. And then the team went in and set up a couple of these vertical arrays, and in between them they made one of these a version of the thing that opens walls, or doors in solid walls, and they cut the surface or the shaft. They cut a like a plane right through it from top to bottom between these two posts, and they slid them apart because they were such a fine cut that the air pressure was holding them together. And when you looked at the end of the shaft, it was like a mirror. It was that fine a surface. But that was about the only time I ever heard of it, that they even came close to letting somebody see that technology that wasn't in the program.
so if it was already so far advanced way back then you got to believe it'd be a heck of a lot more advanced with another 30 odd years. Oh, well, even more than 30 years, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, people will be saying who could make war with them. They're so far beyond us technologically. And it won't be like, the French Resistance, or like V, where people can hide in little places and store guns and weapons and go fight the baddies, and
Yeah.
you haven't got a chance that way.
So that's really interesting. They're pushing things like Independence Day, that, movie sequel or whatever. It's interesting timing. So how do people stop themselves from being deceived?
Well, if you're listening to this, that's the first part of it. Understand what the deception is. And I do believe that the Lord Yeshua will take us to a place of safety, whether it be in a rapture or whether it be to a place here on the planet or whatever. but he will look after the church. And the main thing is to be keeping close with him every day and look up, and look forward to his coming for you, because without him, we cannot defeat what is gripping the planet.
Yeah, that's good. That's good advice. Yes, it's certainly getting interesting, that's for sure. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I've just seen so many things happen in the last year in world politics that convince me that they're driving the people of Earth that don't know better into despair, and to a point where they will accept an off-world alien messiah. And the movies are conditioning us to that viewpoint.
Yeah.
Just amazing when you know what's happening and what the plan is. You can see this stuff happening all around you. But if you're just kind of being retired and happy and going through life and going on holidays and this kind of stuff and not paying attention, you're going to get caught off guard. You're going to lose everything that you own.
Yeah. Yes, totally agree. So where can the listeners find you on the internet?
Well, we have the website. It's standeyo.com, STANDEYO.com. And when we have pressing news or important news, we put it up on that site or on the show images page, which there's a link to it off of the front page there. And once a week, I try to update that with current events of things that we're doing or things that we've seen in the world scene that do fit with prophecy. That's all we do.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for coming back again today. This has got to be one of the best shows yet, I think.
You reckon?
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. Oh, yeah, absolutely fascinating. So, yeah.
Well, it's just life. To me, it's just recounting what happened, and I've done that a few times, so that's probably why I don't get too excited anymore. I'm just repeating what I've done.
But to so many people, they won't have heard it. So, there's a whole new generation coming up and things. So that's...
I forget that, but you're right. You're right, Tony. It's the new generation hasn't heard or been involved in what we were doing 50 years ago.
So thank you, Stan. Thank you very much for coming on again today.
You bet. Thank you.
Well, folks, I hope you got as much out of that as I did. I thought Stan was absolutely great today, and I thoroughly enjoyed being the interviewer. Please visit aminutetomidnite.com. We post all our shows on there in audio and video format, and we also have great articles regularly posted on there as well. There is a donate button on the website if you feel led to contribute. That really would help us to keep this going as well. We also have an A Minute to Midnight Facebook group. If you want to join that, that'd be great. And another way you can help support us is I write and record all the music for all our shows, and you can find music and sound effects at rockshawsounds.com. There's a link to that website on the aminutetomidnite.com website, and if you're making videos or anything similar and you want sound effects or royalty-free music, please check it out. Well, that's it from me for today. See you in the next episode.